welcome back to the third week of working on your wikis. Now, as I've been saying, at the end of today's session, your wikis need to be finished. However, I won't be locking the wikis, so if there are a few little things that you want to go in and rejig before next week when we do the wiki marking, you can do that. But what I don't want is for you to leave lots of work to do that you then have to go home and do between this week and next week. So we really want, as a team, to have the wikis finalised today. Now, I'm going to give you a bit more detail in a minute about things I want you to pay attention to, such as making sure your team pages look fab, making sure that all of your pages are clear, who's written what, the content, you've got references, nice use of images, things like that. But we'll go through that in a bit more detail in a minute. So in next week's session, we're going to be using peer marking. So we're going to pair the teams together. So you'll work with another team. You'll get to tell the other team a little bit about your wiki, and you'll then mark their wiki and they will mark yours. And we're going to give you a mark sheet to help you with that. Now, the best way to prepare for that session is to use the mark sheet to look at your own wiki this week. So as you're finalising things, you'll be thinking about how you're going to be judged, and therefore you'll make sure that all those different elements are done really well. So I'll give you the mark sheets in your teams today so that you can use those. I also just wanted to tell you about 2 prizes that we're going to have at the end of the module, which are going to be judged by the co-learners. Now, the 2 prizes are for your work on the wikis. So they'll be making the judgment next week, and then the prizes will be awarded in the final week. The first prize is going to be for the team that makes the best team page. So it is worth trying to pay a little bit of attention to really lifting that team page and making it the best. And don't forget, you can go and look at everyone else's, so there's no excuse for not knowing what a best one looks like. If you see one you really like, come back to yours and make sure that yours is even better. It's really important because, like I said, working as a team is not just about joining with other people and doing the same work sitting next to each other. It's about finding out about each other and using each other to the best effect within the team. And so the team page is really a representation of that. So the first prize is for the best team page. Now, the second prize is for the team that has bent Blackboard the furthest, done the most imaginative and creative things within the constraints of Blackboard. So I know that none of the wikis are going to look beautiful, and I know you could do much better work if you weren't having to use Blackboard, but which team has really managed to make Blackboard do the best that it can? So maybe using different hyperlinks from page to page, use of different tools within Blackboard. You might even record some video content yourself on your pages, I don't know. So the team that has done that. So the 2 prizes, best team page and best use of Blackboard. Okay, so let's get into a bit more detail about what I want you to do today. Okay, so this is the 3rd week of working on our wikis. So as you'll remember, you've already mostly made your team pages, you've mapped out the scope and definitions of your global challenge, and everybody's made a contribution to the wiki. You've started making your research pages and writing them up, and you're going to finalise that today. And I want you to really pay attention to these last 2 things, the format and style, so having some consistency across the wiki. So if one person's done something that looks really stylish, maybe everyone else in the team could copy that. So come back and make sure that your formatting and style is really consistent. And then just make sure that your wiki has a logical structure. So remember that the pages will organise alphanumerically, except for the first page that always stays at the top of the list. So if you want your pages to have a particular order, which is a good idea, perhaps numbering them is a good way to make sure that they display in the correct order. So have a little think about structure. So just before we get into a bit more detail about the finalising of the wikis, I want to come back to what I was talking about last week. So if you remember, last week I showed you the hours of the day that you've been working on the wiki, and we talked about learning fitness and making sure that you're maximising your ability to learn by getting enough sleep at night. So this is the graph from last week, and if you remember, this is what I was upset about, these 3 things here where you're working at night. And I reminded you that there would be a prize for the whole class if nobody worked between midnight and 6 AM for the entire week. So this afternoon I've pulled off the statistics to see whether you've achieved your prize or not. And, drum roll, I'm really sorry to tell you you didn't. Look what's going on here. That is not good. We don't want to see that. So never mind. And interestingly, I was going to say, oh, but you did better than last week, but actually you did exactly the same. It was the same number of activations, slightly different times, but the same number of activations. So this is just something to keep an eye on. We're not doing anything in this module that requires you to be working during the night. If you had an exam to study for, or you were up against a really tight deadline on your main degree, then that's fine, but you need to save that kind of capacity for when you really need it and not be using it at times like this when we're working on something that isn't that important. So never mind, we'll put that to one side. and hopefully it's just given you something to think about. So I wanted to just remind you what the key things are that your wiki is going to be marked on, just things to pay attention to today. So number one, team page. I know you've mostly made the team pages. Some of them are fab, some of them are a little less fab and could do with a little bit of attention. So just have a think about what makes a team page really engaging. How would you introduce yourselves as a group of people to anybody that hadn't met you? What things is it useful for us to know about you? And how can you make that page look really great? So secondly, the justification and scope. Now, lots of teams have done this really well, so there's loads of good examples for you to go and have a look at. So if you're not sure if you've done it right, go and look at what other people have done and just have a look and think, is there any way you could make yours any better? But as I said, there are some really good justification pages out there, so go and have a look at those. Then you want something that takes you into the pages that you've made individually. So we're sort of calling this related issues or detail. So you might want to have one page that introduces all the individual pages, just a way to transition from thinking about the main topic to those different details that you've got. And then remember that you need to have a bibliography. So this is a list of all the sources used across the whole wiki. Now, most teams have got a bibliography page. I don't think anyone's actually got any sources listed in there yet, but I know we're not at the end, so there's still time. So just don't forget that, because it's a very easy thing to let it slip and then try and rush it at the end, and it actually takes a bit of time. So maybe put somebody on that. If you're all busy working on your pages, perhaps you could get the co-learners to help with just collating that for you. Now, in terms of your work across all the different pages of the wiki, there's a few different things to pay attention to. So they're the kind of the key elements that we want to see. But then we want to pay attention to the formatting and style, like I said. So just little simple things like using the same font, the same size of headings on different pages. Little things like that make the whole wiki look really coherent. I want you to think about the use of images. So I know we said don't use tables, or be very careful with the use of tables, but images and graphics, anything that breaks up the text and makes it more accessible. So remember, you're not writing this for specialists, you're writing this for sort of general interest. So you want it to look interesting as well as have interesting content within the writing. So images and graphics are really good for that. And the key thing we want to see is that you've demonstrated understanding. So there's no magic formula for how much you need to write, how much detail you need to include, but we want to know that you've researched something and that you've understood it. And a good way to demonstrate that is to try and write something that draws together information from more than one source. There's no magic length it needs to be, but written in your own words will really demonstrate that you've understood something. So even if you just contribute one paragraph or one page to your wiki, have a look and think about whether you've really demonstrated understanding something rather than just copying things from the internet or bringing sources together but not actually writing anything in your own words. And then don't forget, we do need to be aware of academic standards in writing. And this is things like referencing. So we haven't required you to use a particular type of referencing, but just have a think about whether you are using source attribution well. So if you've used something from the internet, if you've copied and pasted it, that's fine, but make a note that that's what's happened. So put it in quote marks and put the source details afterwards. So they're the things that I want you to pay attention to today. And just a reminder that there will be 2 prizes. So pay a bit of attention to that as well. So best team page and best use of Blackboard. And it'll be the co-learners judging that. So they will have seen how much you've had to struggle with Blackboard during the 3 weeks of doing the wikis, and they'll take that into account when they're judging that. So those are just things to bear in mind. So you've got the rest of today's session, and at the end of today your wiki should be 98% finished, just maybe a few little bits to tidy up in the week, and then at the start of next week's session I'll explain how it's going to work and how we're going to do the marking, but the whole of that session will be used for that, so there'll be no more working time on the wikis after today. So make the most of today's session and have fun in your teams.